Hi there, it's Mark and welcome to episode 2 of Adobe Photoshop for Photographers, a series of video tutorials designed to improve your Photoshop skills with a photography bias. And today we're going to be looking at the photo editing toolset, or at least part of that toolset. It probably will spill into more than one video. Specifically for today, we're going to be looking at Adobe Camera Raw, which, as we found out in the previous video, is kind of Lightroom within Photoshop. We'll be looking at cropping, straightening, removing spots, removing small objects, and that introduces us to some very basic selections. We'll be looking at curves and blend modes, which is more to do with adjustments and more to do with layers. So already we're building on our brief knowledge, our introduction to layers and masks and such from the previous video, and video by video as we go through we'll get more advanced in those particular topics. It's not something we want to nail in any one topic, so we'll use them practically from picture to picture and build the techniques as we roll forward. That's all really I've got to say about today's episode, but I will say a big shout out, thank you to everyone who left comments, questions and gave feedback on episode 1. Long may it continue. The whole concept here is I provide you with the materials to download and play along. You press pause to go back over any tip, trick or technique we've actually just demonstrated to cement your understanding of that, and then press play again and ask any questions. Throw them in the comments. I will answer them as soon as I can. Worst case scenario, if there are common themes and we don't get around to it during the individual videos, I will do a bespoke mop-up at the end to try and get through all the Q&As. Right, all that remains to do now is play the titles, and they're cunningly timed at 8.9 seconds, which has been scientifically proved to be the exact amount of time needed to look down, find the subscribe button, check it's the subscribe button, it's the red thing with subscribe written on, and click it. And also, when the bell comes up, click that so you're notified of all future episodes as and when I publish them. Oh, and a thumbs up wouldn't go amiss either. Takes seconds, really helps the channel and helps me develop the videos for you. We've got over 100 now, 20% of which are made because you've asked particular questions and they've been directly in response to that. So let's collaborate on this, cement our understanding of Photoshop and get cracking. Here's the credits. Alright, here we are in sunny Lightroom. These images have not been edited at all. I've simply dragged and dropped them in from the zip file. And I'm going to click on the first one and the last one. Right click, edit in Adobe Photoshop. If you haven't got Lightroom, or if whatever other photo editing tool you use does not allow edit in Photoshop, you can load these directly into Photoshop, and I showed you how to do that on the first episode, which I will link to above. Okay, so we said that in this episode we'd start to go through the photographer toolset, looking at straightening and cropping, blending layers, curves, looking at camera raw, and removing spots and cleaning up things. So we'll be looking at cloning, patching, and content aware fill. So quite a lot to get our teeth into, and we'll continue in the next episode with even more of what I'm calling the photographer editing toolset. So first and foremost though, let us start with this particular boathouse. Before we start, let's just take a copy of our layer. So Control or Command J, Control J on a PC, Command J on a Mac. And also, I'm just going to make these larger thumbnails so it's easier for us to see what's going on. Okay, so I think on this one we'll be looking at spot removal and such. So all the spot removal, spot healing tools, patch tools live under this section here, which is J is the shortcut key, and it will bring up whichever tool you used last. So currently you can see I was on the patch tool by the icon that's in there. If I'd previously used the spot tool, then that would be the icon. So J gets you to the group, but most of the time you probably want to change what tool you're using. But we're going to start with spot healing. I would guess 9 times out of 10 people just throw onto spot healing and come straight over and start doing things like healing spots. And that is perfectly adequate and nothing wrong with that at all, and as you can see it works. And you needn't just dab either with your brush, so you could change the size of your brush, left and right hand bracket keys, lots of ways of doing it, but I do that way. And you can actually draw lines to get rid of things. I tend to use a brush towards the soft end rather than a hard edge brush, because spot healing and patching and cloning and things like that are all about making sure that when you do this, the borders, the edges blend better, and I think with a softer brush that is easier to do. So that's the beginning of the spot tool, but there are settings. I'm not going to go through every single setting on everything, but there are settings. So there's create texture setting. So the first one was content aware. So with content aware, for all the times we see it, not just on spot healing here, every time we see content aware, Photoshop tries to work out what the actual content should be and uses that content, that intelligence, for want of a better word, to do the patching, cloning, or whatever it is we're actually using content aware for. Then there is create texture. So here Photoshop majors on any texture surrounding the area we're doing the spot removal from and uses that as its priority. And here on proximity, it uses the pixels immediately in the vicinity of the spot itself. It doesn't really stray out of there, and this one is better for having a smaller brush and getting rid of, for example, pimples if you're doing a photo touch-up on a portrait. So that's the spot healing brush. By and large though, content aware is where you want to be, and yes, just make it bigger or smaller and go for it. How big can you get? Well, let's just, for something silly to do, I'm just going to make it rather big, and let's see if we can get that in 1. Not quite. Valiant effort, Photoshop, Control Z, but it's not meant for that. What is meant for that is jumping over to the patch tool. I'll come back to healing brush in a second. With the patch tool, we can draw around the object, and then again we're in content aware, we can drag it to one side, and when I leave go with my mouse, Photoshop goes back to the area we've just moved out from and uses content aware technology to fill that. If I do Control D or Command D to get rid of the selection outline, you can hardly tell that that was there. Control Z just to put it back. Control Z, Control Z. You've also got structure and color here, and these are worth playing with if content aware doesn't seem to be working as well as it should for you when you're patching, and that will vary picture to picture to picture. But structure is how strongly Photoshop should adhere to existing patterns and textures, where 7 is the highest you can go to, and that's adhere to it as much as you can, and 1 is kind of just giving Photoshop a suggestion. Yeah, I'm not really bothered. Stick to the patterns and structure if you want, really, it's up to you. Color, on the other hand, is from 0 to 10. 10 is the maximum, 0 is none, and it's how much you color blend when you're patching. It's difficult to demonstrate. It would be difficult to find an ideal picture to demonstrate on, but just be aware of them. I tend to put them midway, so 4 is about as close as I can get to the middle between 1 and 7, and color 5 between 0 and 10. But be aware of them, and if something's just not off, you might want to actually decrease or increase structure or color when you're doing that. But patching, dead easy. So again, just around, click and drag, and you can see that before I leave go, you can see where it's going to get the patch from. So you can see I've got the boat now appearing where we're going to patch, and if I leave go, that just would be so wrong. Control Z. So you want to try and intelligently move this around to get a better patch, and there you go. Control Z to take us back. So that's patching in a nutshell. Now then, let's go back to healing brush. The difference between the spot and the healing brush is the spot will try and recreate things based on whether you've chosen content aware, texture or proximity, and lets you choose where you want to patch from. So I'm going to attack this again, but I'm going to choose this as my source. So Option or Alt key on a PC, hold that down and the cursor changes. Then click and I've sampled that area now. I'll just put it over something where you can see through on the boathouse black that was indeed what we had up here. And as soon as I click here, a crosshair appears just to the left of my cursor, and as I move along, the crosshair is showing me where it's tracking to fill in. And you couldn't tell that wasn't like that in the first place. Be wary, however, if you're patching things and you've got a regular pattern. So I'm just going to sample this tree here, Option and Alt click, and as I paint it will actually put in another tree here, which we might be able to get away with if we're just playing with this a bit. But if I then go over and start doing this, you start seeing another tree. Not that we'd be doing this, but it's easier to tell now that they are the same tree. So depending on how you're patching and where you're selecting from, it's important to keep resampling. I'll just Control Z to get rid of these. So here, when we were getting rid of the signpost, we didn't have a problem, but we could have Option click sample there for the first part, and then possibly Option click sample there, and so we're guaranteed not to get any repetition in the picture. And Photoshop will try its best to blend things in. So again, that's something worth bearing in mind. Sometimes on foliage like this you get away with it, but where there's repeated structures, it's not your friend unless you deliberately want it to be. I've used this technique to extend an iron railing, and all the vertical bars in the iron railing were exactly the same, so it really did work, the fact that it repeated the pattern for me. Right, let's Control Z those out, and we're going to attack this again. So picking on this poor board, we're going to use Content Aware Move. Now there's two main versions here. There's Move and Extend. Color and structure are as we discussed before. When we're in Move, I'm just going to pick this notice board up again, and I'm going to move it to there. And when I leave go of my cursor, I can now resize that with these transform tool tags on the side, and we'll be discussing transform tool another time, but I'm just going to press enter for now. And what it's done is it's moved it, and then it's filled in the gap behind. It hasn't done a really good job of filling in, because you can see it's taken the number 10 of the signpost there and put that there. It saw that as a viable piece to fill and move in, but it's done a reasonable job of not only relocating it but backfilling. So move is kind of move and backfill, and the backfill is a content aware backfill based on what Photoshop thinks is actually in the picture. Control Z, Control Z. Let's do it again, this time with the extend. So we'll just take the selection, click, drag it over, and when I leave go this time, again I can transform this size and shape with the tags. I'm just going to press enter and Control D to get rid of the selection. So what it's done now is extending has actually moved it. Control Z, Control Z. Back to this picture though, what I would like to do with this picture, and the reason I was wanting to patch it at all, was I didn't like this highlight up there. I wanted that to continue with thick wood, and so go get our patch tool. I might as well do the edit I wanted to do on this and just roughly patch that and slide, see where I want this to look. I think this side will stay at the dark side. Control D to get rid of that. And because we've done that, we wouldn't have this reflection here. So I'm going to try and move the reflection over as well. Something like that. And Control D. Now you see we've got this repeated here. It looks artificial, so I'm now going to do a second one to get rid of that altogether and move that out to there. Control D. So I've successfully patched that very easily. It would have been a very, very, very complex selection. In fact, I wouldn't have bothered trying to actually make a proper selection. Patch tool came to our rescue. And that's it. That's those tools all covered off, barred red eye. But there are no red eyes in here to address. So let's move on to another picture. So this next picture is of a cruise boat going down the River Wear as it circles the city of Durham. And it's almost quite literally a picture of two halves, with a predominantly light half at the top and a dark half at the bottom. Now what I want to achieve on this edit is to brighten all the foliage in the trees, the forest lining the side of the river, and we're going to do that with an adjustment layer. Now I've not bothered taking a copy of the background layer just yet, because I'm not actually touching that layer. I'm adding adjustment layers on top. So down in our adjustment layers, I'm going to choose a curves adjustment. Now we'll see curves off and on as we go through, and we'll get more adept at doing them, and I've even got a dedicated video on curves which I'll link to when the time is right. But for now, this is a histogram which represents the tonal values of our picture, from blacks to shadows to midtones to highlights to whites, and you can see the peaks here. And they kind of represent the fact that we've got an awful lot in the dark end of the spectrum, and then mids heading up towards whites but not that close. We've got highlighted area at the top. The curve can be used at these relevant points to change the luminosity within that tone. So if I click here, which is down in the blacks, and I move it up, we're lifting the blacks. We're also, because the tone curve is following on, blowing out the sky. Now I could come and start to bring that back by bringing down the top, but pretty soon you can actually get quite muddy, and with the tone curve less is actually more. So I'm just going to click on the reset button here, which is this one, and instead I'm going to do one change on the curve just below midtones and pick that up, and I'm watching the forest, only the forest here. And I think that does it about there. But it's far too bright up above. Well, we've got a mask. B for our brush tool, D for default colors, and toggle it with the X to get black as our foreground color. I'm going to make my brush a bit bigger using the right hand bracket key. And clearly on the mask, I'm going to paint black, which tells Photoshop, do not show anything that this curve layer is doing where I am painting black. And because it's a soft brush that we've got, it has a natural feather to it, so I can get close to that line. I don't have to do a convoluted selection to make sure that I select every single branch and omit them from it, because the feather of a larger brush is doing that for us. And there you go, we've taken out the effect of that curve from the sky. The sky is not changing at all. That'd be one way to approach this problem. Another way could be with an adjustment layer called levels. Now, as you will find it over time, levels is kind of a subset of curves. Everything that levels does, you can do with a curve, but not the other way around. Levels is just a subset. I'm going to switch the curves off, come back to levels, and I'm going to take black at this end, white at this end, and midtones here, and I'm going to do the similar sort of thing by moving the midtone point on my levels. And again, we've got this problem, and the reason why I wanted to do both is because I wanted to show you something to do with masks. Now if I click on this mask and hold down my Option or Alt key, I can drag it up and release. Do I want to replace it? Yes. So I've duplicated that mask onto our levels. Let's get Photoshop to do a bit more of the legwork for us here, shall we? Let's switch that one off by asking Photoshop to select the sky. So select. Why doesn't it allow us to select the sky? Because we're not on a layer which has a picture in. We're on an adjustment layer. Let's click on the background layer. Now let's go and select sky. thinks for a few seconds, then it's done a selection. It's done a better selection we did just rubbing with our brush tool, but as I explained with the big feather, that is neither here nor there. Now it has selected the sky. I actually don't want the sky. I want everything except the sky. So I want to tell it that I want the opposite selection. Now there are a few ways you can do that. Shift, Control and I, or Shift, Command and I on a Mac swaps the selection around. So now I've selected everything except the sky. Now one thing that happens whenever you pick an adjustment tool, and I'm going to go for curves, whenever you pick an adjustment tool, it comes with a mask. But if you've already got a selection, the mask is automatically applied to that selection. So when I click on curves, it's added the curves in, and you can tell by looking that that is a far more accurate selection, and it's only going to impact the bottom half of our picture. Okay, so that's none of that was massively startling. We've learned how to use a curve to do a generic curve, but more important, and levels, but more importantly, we've learned how we can alter the tool once it's applied by using a mask. We can make a selection in advance of creating an adjustment layer, and the selection will go onto that adjustment layer. And we also found a little quick keyboard shortcut for inverting a mask, selecting exactly the opposite. I'm sticking with his curves on this one, but it's a bit too bright. I could actually alter it here, but instead, reminding ourselves there are more than one ways to do things, I'm going to click to the side and use this slider to bring down the amount of opacity on that curves layer to about something like 75%. And so that's it, just a number of different ways to actually just approach some of these tools on this particular picture. Quick reminder, if you haven't already, please click on that subscribe button and ring that bell to be notified of future episodes. If it warrants a like, give it a thumbs up. And if you've got any questions thus far that you haven't been able to solve by pressing pause and having a redo of the tool or tip or technique, then stick them in the comments below and I will answer them all for you. Our next picture is, yes, we're going to do a little bit of Adobe Camera Raw in here as well. This is Walkworth Castle as seen from Amble Pier. There could be times during an edit where you want to go and use one of the features that's in Lightroom because it's just a little bit more convenient for you perhaps. And rather than save where you're up to as a document and then go back into Lightroom to make that adjustment and then reopen it in Photoshop, you can call up the equivalent of Lightroom within Photoshop. It's called the Camera Raw filter, also known as Adobe Camera Raw. And we're going to use this to alter some dehaze because this picture does need some dehazing. Now, because we are altering the picture this time, unlike the previous example where we just added adjustment layers, I'm going to secure a copy with Command J on my Mac or Control J on a PC. Now, I was going to just jump straight into Adobe Camera Raw, but I think I will talk about smart objects first. I was going to save smart objects for a later video, but let's do them now and see if we can do them intuitively. What is a smart object? Well, it's easier to show you. Here's the layer. Under filter, we've got Adobe Camera Raw or Camera Raw filter. We'll be doing some of these other filters in due course. Not today though. So I go for Camera Raw filter, and up comes our Lightroom clone. You can see all the usual things down here. We can change any one of them, you know, the temperature, whatever, but I'm going to go for dehaze. Probably do around about 30%, looks about right, and I'm going to click OK. So that's it. I've actually used Camera Raw to make a change. Hang on, I want the dehazing a bit stronger, so let's go back to filter, Camera Raw filter. Hang on, dehaze is at 0. Yes, I can add to it, but what happened to the 30% I stuck on before? Well, what happened, I'll just cancel this. Well, what happened was that those changes were burnt in to this layer, and we can't actually go back. I can go Control Z and take them out and revisit, but wouldn't it be nice to just dip in and out of Camera Raw whenever I wanted, or any other filter or effect, and pick up where we left off? And that's what Smart Objects do. So here's a copy of the layer. I've done Control Z, so nothing's been applied to it. I will right click and convert for Smart Objects. This little icon tells me it's a Smart Object, and let's go back to that filter. Now I could also convert to Smart Objects up here. It's currently grayed out because I've already done it, and I don't like the way up here it says convert for Smart Filters and down here it said Smart Objects. They are the same thing. But let's go to Camera Raw now, and let's make that adjustment to dehaze around about 30% and click OK. Notice we've now got a mask underneath here which we can apply to these filters, but we've also got an instance of Camera Raw filter. Let's do something else to this. Let's add a curve layer above and just darken that a little bit and line it a bit. And now we think, oh, hang on, I wanted to adjust that a little bit more, so that I wanted to adjust the dehazing a bit more. So let's go back and double click here, and it opens up our Lightroom clone, and our dehaze value is preserved. So I can add to it, possibly make one or two other little adjustments while I'm in here, and click OK. And it doesn't matter how much I go through this document changing or whatever. For my Smart Objects, I can always go back and click on the instance of the adjustment or edit I have there, and it'll pick up where it left off. So it is keeping the adjustments separate from the actual layer. Visually, you see the picture with all the adjustments applied, but practically they are kept separate for us to revisit, and that is Smart Objects. And that's all I've got for you on this particular picture. It was important to get over the fact of Adobe Camera Raw and being able to call it up. I didn't do a lot in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm not teaching you how to edit in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm not actually teaching you how to change the picture aesthetically in Photoshop. I'm teaching you how to get the tools up to be able to do that for yourself. But a very valuable lesson. Smart Objects are your friend. If you're not too sure about whether or not you've got the right value of a blur or a filter such as Adobe Camera Raw. Let's move on to our last picture, which is Cragside Hall in Northumberland. I'm very conscious that we've passed through 30 minutes, so I'm actually going to move the blending layers into next week's video, and for now finish off with another one of the adjustment layers, which is part of the photographer editing tool sets, and do cropping and straightening. Now this does need straightening. There are a number of ways we can do this, but first C for a crop tool, and I'll just click in the middle, and there's my grid. And I can choose now to just manually crop like this, or I can choose particular ratios that are built in, or indeed I can type them in myself. 10:1, something ridiculous. It doesn't matter. Personally, I prefer to leave it clear, and I like to choose my own crop. Unless I'm cropping for a particular size print, then I will crop to what I think suits the picture best, even if it's a non-conformist type crop. But how to straighten this? Well, there is a little straighten tool here. If you click on it, you can position your cursor on the straight lines and leave go, and it will then go to straighten the picture. But notice how in doing so I've lost part of the picture here, and I've lost part of the picture here, here, and here. If I use content away, it will fix that for me. But we've made a fundamental mistake here. Press escape. What I need to do is secure a copy of my background. Control or Command J. Now let's go back in and click and apply a straightening. And I'll use this chimney stack here. And I'll click OK, and Content Aware should fill in those gaps for us. And indeed it does, and it's done a fairly good job. If I was shown this picture, I would not have known that it had been straightened, and as a consequence Photoshop decided what to fill in the gaps with. Incidentally, when you click delete crop pixels, and if you were to crop this picture to there, you would lose all these pixels. So when you go back in, they are not there. You can't then undo that crop. So I rarely have delete crop pixels in there. I'm just going to press my escape key to come out of the crop grid. You can also choose ratios for yourself over here. So there's our cropping. It's really quite easy. Just remember that delete crop pixels will delete them, Content Aware will refill, and you've got some options in here to apply your grid. So what was our grid like? We could actually change our grid to show rule of thirds, which it already is, or diagonals, whatever particular crop guidelines you want for the style of crop you're going for, you can just apply here as a visual aid. I'm going to press escape again to come out. So crop, very easy. Let us now apply a black and white adjustment layer. Now, why has it got colours? It's got colours because it looks at the underlying layer, its actual colour, and gives us that band to change. Now, our flowers were predominantly magenta. So if I use this, you can see I can really brighten the flowers or start to darken them. The blue won't affect much at all because it was a cloudy day. There isn't any blue in the picture. As you can see, that's hardly changing things at all. Cyan, was there much in cyan? Just the branches on the right hand side past the house. Greens, yep, we had the bushes. Yellows, so this is where most of the brickwork and some of the foliage will come in as well. And reds, probably the brick again, and the roof. So I like that, it darkens the roof quite a bit, but I think I want to offset that against brightening the flowers a bit more. So that's how you apply a black and white adjustment. And if you can't remember the underlying colours, just switch it off to remind yourself. Or, as is the case right at the beginning of this video, I made the thumbnails a little bit larger so it was easier for us to see. And I'm going to have to stop there. I've run out of tea, I've overrun, I've already relegated something to next week's video, but that's Photoshop for you. If you like what we're doing, please click on the subscribe button, ring the bell, give a thumbs up, stick all your comments and questions below. I really enjoyed reading the previous ones, some good feedback, and I've been sent a couple of questions as well, which I'll kind of squeeze in as we go forward. And with that, I'm going to say bye. Bye for now.